You think you know your life. You think you know your family. You see your child's face and you see yourself, you see your spouse, and you see a reflection of a life well lived, a testament to your love. You see a future, a legacy. But what if all of it, every single memory, every cherished glance, every late-night lullaby, was built on a lie so profound, so devastating, it wasn't even your lie to tell? This isn't a story about a hidden affair or a secret inheritance. This is a story about a mother and a father, a couple who did everything right, only to discover that the child they raised, the one they called their adopted son, was actually the biological son they lost the day he was born. Our story begins in a quiet, idyllic town, a place where people leave their doors unlocked and trust is a currency more valuable than gold. Here we meet Sarah and Michael. They were the epitome of a perfect couple. High school sweethearts who built a life together from the ground up, a life filled with laughter, shared dreams, and a deep, abiding love. The only piece missing from their beautiful puzzle was a child. After years of trying, of heartbreaking disappointments and whispered prayers, they finally decided to open their hearts and their home to adoption. They had always talked about adoption, a beautiful, selfless act. So, with cautious optimism, they began the process. It was a long, emotionally taxing journey, but they were determined. Then, one day, they got the call. A call that would change their lives forever. A 6-week-old baby boy, abandoned at a local hospital. His name was Leo. The moment Sarah held Leo in her arms, a sense of rightness, of belonging, washed over her. He had a shock of dark, curly hair, eyes the color of warm honey, and a smile that could melt the coldest heart. He wasn't a stranger. He was her son. Michael felt the same. Leo completed them. They fell into the rhythm of parenthood with an ease that felt preordained. They celebrated every first step, every first word, every tiny victory with the kind of joy that could only come from a deep, unconditional love. Years went by. Leo grew into a bright, kind, and compassionate young man. He was an artist, a dreamer, a soul full of light. He and Michael shared a love for fishing, spending weekends by the lake, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah and Leo would spend hours in the kitchen, baking and laughing, their bond as strong as any biological one could be. They were a family, and that was all that mattered. But there was a ghost in their past. A ghost they rarely spoke of, a quiet, lingering sadness that would surface on certain anniversaries. Before they adopted Leo, Sarah had been pregnant. It was a difficult pregnancy, riddled with complications. And tragically, they lost their baby. A little boy. They named him Daniel. They were told there was an issue, a rare genetic disorder, and the doctors, with somber faces and hushed tones, had explained that their little Daniel had passed away just hours after birth. It was a devastating blow, a wound that never fully healed. They grieved in their own ways, supporting each other through the darkest days of their lives. They had buried their son, their hopes, and their dreams with him. The adoption of Leo, a beautiful, miraculous turn of events, had helped them mend their broken hearts. Or so they thought. The memory of Daniel was a part of their story, a painful but real part. They kept a small box of his things, a tiny knit blanket, a photograph of his hand, a testament to a life that had been and was gone. But what if it wasn't gone? What if the life they mourned wasn't the life they lost? What if the son they grieved wasn't the son they were told had died? What if the story they had been told, the tragedy they had accepted, was nothing more than a carefully crafted lie? The truth, it would turn out, was far more shocking, far more twisted, than any of them could have ever imagined. It was a truth that would unravel their entire world and expose a web of deceit that had been spun in the most sacred of places. This is where our story truly begins. With a chance encounter, a subtle detail, a quiet moment of doubt that would grow into a roaring suspicion. A suspicion that would force Sarah to dig into a past she had painstakingly buried. A past that held the key to a truth so unimaginable, it could shatter their family into a million pieces. Because one day, as she was helping Leo clean out his old things, she found a hospital bracelet. It was a small, unassuming piece of plastic. But on it, a name was printed. A name that would send a shiver of ice down her spine. A name that didn't belong to Leo, but to the son she thought she had buried. Daniel. And the birth date, it was the same as Leo's. The truth, they say, is stranger than fiction. But in this case, the truth was a nightmare, and the family who had found a new life were about to learn that their new life was a life stolen. The hospital bracelet felt like a brand, a searing mark of a lie she couldn't comprehend. Sarah stared at it, her hands trembling, the small piece of plastic feeling heavier than any burden she had ever carried. Daniel, born October 14th, the same date as Leo's adoption papers listed his birth. The silence in the house was deafening. The cheerful hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a lawnmower, all of it seemed to mock the chaos swirling in her mind. This wasn't a coincidence. Couldn't be. Daniel had died. The doctors had told her, they had shown her the paperwork, they had even let her hold his tiny, still body. She remembered the coldness of his skin, the profound emptiness in her arms. It was a memory etched in her soul, a scar she had carried for over a decade. But what if that memory wasn't real? What if it was a carefully constructed illusion, a cruel theatrical performance designed to make her believe a falsehood, so she would forget to ask the right questions? The doubt, once a whisper, was now a scream. Sarah didn't tell Michael yet. She couldn't. Not until she knew for sure. She felt like she was betraying him, betraying their beautiful life, by even entertaining the idea. But the bracelet, it was a physical, undeniable piece of evidence. She started small, her research timid at first. She went through old photographs, adoption papers, anything she could find. She noticed subtle things she had never paid attention to before. The dates on the adoption papers were slightly off. The hospital's name on the documentation for Daniel's death was a different wing, a different department than the one listed on Leo's birth certificate. They were all small, insignificant details on their own, but when pieced together, they started to form a horrifying new picture. A puzzle with jagged, mismatched pieces that somehow fit together to form a monstrous truth. The deep dive into the past became an obsession. Sarah was barely sleeping, her nights filled with an endless parade of old documents, cryptic notes, and a growing sense of dread. She found herself at the Old Town Library, poring over microfiche of local newspapers from a decade ago. She was looking for something, anything that would confirm her suspicions. And then she found it, a small, unassuming article on the back page of the local Gazette. It was a human interest piece about the town's beloved hospital, celebrating a new wing and a new chief of staff. The article mentioned a recent unfortunate incident involving a clerical error, a mix-up of newborn babies that had been quickly and discreetly resolved. Her heart stopped. It was a vague, almost throwaway line, but for Sarah it was a thunderclap. Clerical error. A mix-up. It was a phrase that haunted her. She realized the hospital that had been a sanctuary, a place of healing, was also a place of secrets, a place where her life, her family, had been torn apart and put back together in a way she never could have imagined. The next step was the hardest. She had to confront the hospital, the very institution that had given and taken so much from her. She scheduled an appointment, her stomach a tight knot of nerves. She walked into the cold, sterile building, the scent of antiseptic bringing back a flood of painful memories. She asked to speak with the hospital administrator, her voice trembling but her resolve as hard as steel. She laid out her findings, the bracelet, the conflicting paperwork, the vague newspaper article. The administrator, a woman with a practiced, placid expression, listened patiently, her face a mask of polite indifference. But as Sarah spoke, as she laid out the evidence with a quiet, desperate intensity, the mask began to slip. The woman's eyes darted around the room. Her hands fidgeted with a pen. She denied everything, of course, called it a misunderstanding, a terrible coincidence. But the tremor in her voice, the frantic way she tried to dismiss Sarah's claims, told a different story. Sarah left the hospital that day with more questions than answers, but with a horrifying new certainty. She was being stonewalled. They were hiding something. They had lied to her. They had told her she had lost her son, and they had let her believe it, let her grieve for over a decade. And in a cruel, twisted twist of fate, they had given her back to her, but as a stranger, as an adopted child. The very people who should have been her allies, her trusted caregivers, were the ones who had orchestrated this entire elaborate deception. The hospital was a fortress of secrets, and she was just one woman against an institution. But she wasn't alone. She had Michael, she had Leo, and she had the truth, a truth that was slowly, painstakingly, clawing its way to the surface. She was ready to fight. She was ready to face the world, to face the lie, to face the horrifying possibility that the life she had was built on a foundation of sand, a foundation that was about to crumble. The past was no longer a ghost. It was a living, breathing monster, and it was demanding to be heard. The weight of the secret was crushing Sarah. She knew she had to tell Michael, but the words felt like lead on her tongue. How do you tell the man you love, the father of your son, that the child you've both cherished, the one you brought home from the hospital and raised as your own, might be the very same child you mourned a decade ago? Felt impossible. She sat him down one evening, the house silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She started slowly, hesitantly, with the story of the hospital bracelet. She showed him the worn piece of plastic, the name, the date. As she spoke, Michael's face, usually so open and kind, became a mask of disbelief and then, of dawning horror. He listened, his eyes fixed on her, and as she laid out the timeline, the conflicting paperwork, the vague newspaper article, he didn't interrupt. He didn't deny it. He just listened, and his quiet stillness was more terrifying than any outburst could have been. When she finished, there was a long, heavy silence. Michael finally spoke, his voice a low, raw whisper. "Daniel, is Leo?" It wasn't a question, but a statement of dawning, gut-wrenching realization. The name, Daniel, was a ghost to them. The name Leo was their reality, their joy, their son. The two names, in that moment, seemed to crash into each other, creating a vortex of grief and impossible hope. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it was almost unbearable to witness. The trust they had in the world, in institutions, in the very fabric of their reality, had been shattered. They had loved Leo unconditionally. They had poured their hearts and souls into raising him, and they had been so grateful for the chance to be parents again. But the cruel truth was that they had been lied to, manipulated. Their son had been taken from them, and then, in a cosmic, twisted joke, given back to them under a different name. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, phone calls, and agonizing questions. They hired a private investigator, a former detective named Elias who specialized in cold cases. Elias was a grizzled, no-nonsense man with a sharp mind and a quiet empathy. He listened to their story with a stillness that was unnerving. He took the paperwork, the hospital bracelet, and the newspaper article, and he went to work. He didn't promise them a miracle, but he promised them the truth. He started with the hospital. He had connections, and he knew how to navigate the labyrinthine bureaucracy. What he found was more disturbing than they could have imagined. The clerical error wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act. The chief of staff, a powerful and respected doctor named Dr. Alistair Finch, had a deep, dark secret. His own son, a boy named Adam, had been born on the same day as Daniel and another child. But Adam had a severe, incurable health condition. Dr. Finch, desperate to save his son, had made a terrible choice. He had a connection to the local adoption agency. He had used his power, his influence, and his position to swap the hospital records. He had taken Daniel, a healthy newborn, and given his own sick son to a couple who had a history of adopting. The couple who would become Leo's adoptive parents. But the story got even darker. When the other couple, the ones who had adopted Dr. Finch's sick son, discovered the truth, they didn't go to the authorities. They were a fragile couple, older, and desperate for a child. They had been told their adopted son was sick, but the doctors had presented it as a chance for them to provide a loving home to a child who needed it. When they found out their son was a swap, they were devastated. But they were also afraid. Afraid of the powerful Dr. Finch, afraid of losing the child they had already come to love, even with his health issues. Dr. Finch had silenced them, promising them a future of medical care for their son, a life free from financial worry, if they kept their silence. They had agreed, their hearts broken but their desire to keep their child overriding their need for justice. The entire deception had been meticulously planned and executed, a conspiracy of silence that had lasted for a decade. The private investigator laid it all out for them. The two babies had been born within hours of each other. Daniel healthy and strong, Adam sick and frail. Dr. Finch had swapped the name tags. He had told Sarah and Michael their son had died, and had given them a stillborn child from a different mother, an unnamed baby who had been put in the morgue without a family to claim him. He had then given their son, Daniel, to the adoption agency, knowing that his connections there would ensure Daniel ended up in a loving home, a home where his adoptive parents would never know the truth. He had taken care of his own son by giving him the health and the life of another child. The cruelty was unimaginable. Sarah and Michael sat in stunned silence, the full weight of the deception crashing down on them. The truth wasn't a neat, clean conclusion. It was a grotesque, painful mess, a tangled web of lies that had ensnared so many lives. And now they had a choice to make, a choice that would define the rest of their lives. The final piece of the puzzle, the devastating conclusion, was the most difficult to accept. Sarah and Michael sat with Elias, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The truth was out, ugly and brutal. Their son, Daniel, was alive and well, but had been raised as another person, in another home, by another set of parents. The man they had been so grateful to for his help with the adoption, the man they had trusted implicitly, had orchestrated this entire heartbreaking deception. The question now wasn't about uncovering the lie, but about what to do with the truth. Do they tell Leo? Do they shatter his reality, the foundation of his entire life, to reclaim a past they were robbed of? Or do they protect him, and in doing so, continue the lie, a lie that was never theirs to begin with? Their hearts were in turmoil. They loved Leo more than words could say. He was their son in every way that mattered. But the knowledge that he was also Daniel, their biological son, the one they had grieved for, created a profound and agonizing conflict. It was a choice between two equally unbearable paths. The path of truth, which would cause an unimaginable amount of pain and confusion for Leo, and the path of silence, which would mean living with the knowledge of this cruel deception for the rest of their lives. They had to be certain. They had to know without a shadow of a doubt. With Elias's help, they arranged for a private DNA test, a small, discreet procedure that would confirm everything. The results came back a week later. The DNA test was conclusive. Leo was their biological son. The boy they had mourned was the boy they had raised. The boy they had called adopted was actually their own flesh and blood. The full weight of this revelation was staggering. They knew they couldn't keep this from Leo. The lie was too big, too important. It was the foundation of his identity. They sat him down, just as they had done with Michael, and began to tell him the story. They started with their love for him, how he was their son, their miracle. They told him the story of Daniel, of the grief, of the empty arms. And then, slowly, carefully, they laid out the details of the deception. Leo listened, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. He was a bright young man, but this was a truth so fantastical, so twisted, it was hard to believe. They showed him the DNA results, the hospital bracelet, the evidence. And as he read the words, as he saw the evidence with his own eyes, something in him shifted. It wasn't anger or resentment, not yet. It was a profound, disorienting sadness, a sense of loss for the person he thought he was, for the story of his life he had always believed. His identity, his entire world, had been turned upside down. The boy who was adopted was a biological son, and the biological son they had grieved for was the boy they had raised. The two truths, like the two names, crashed together. The aftermath was a long, painful process. The story broke, a scandal of epic proportions. The hospital was investigated. Dr. Finch was stripped of his license and faced legal action. The other couple, the ones who had raised Dr. Finch's sick son, came forward, their story adding another layer of tragedy to the tale. But for Sarah, Michael, and Leo, the real work was in the healing. They had to navigate a new reality. Leo had to come to terms with the fact that his adoptive parents were his biological parents, and that his life had been a lie. Sarah and Michael had to confront the trauma of what had been done to them, of a decade of grief for a child who was never gone. They sought counseling, they leaned on each other, and they held on to the one thing that had been real all along: their love for each other. The bond they had built, the memories they had made, the love they had shared, was the only thing that hadn't been a lie. The story of Daniel, of Leo, of their family, became a testament to the power of love over biology. A beautiful, tragic paradox. A reminder that sometimes the family you choose is the family that was meant to be yours all along. It was a difficult journey, but they walked it together, holding hands, their hearts broken but their spirits unbroken. The lie had shattered their past, but their love had given them the strength to build a new future. They had lost a part of their identity, but they had gained a truth that was more precious than any lie. And in the end, that's what truly matters. The truth, as painful as it may be, is the only foundation on which a life can truly be built. This story is a testament to that. It's a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of lies, love can find a way to shine through. If this story has moved you, if you're as gripped by this unimaginable tale as we are, don't let the conversation end here. We've got more stories like this one. Tales of human spirit, resilience, and shocking truths that will leave you breathless. So please, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Join our community, share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep digging for the truth, one unbelievable story at a time.